Welcome to the Business of Beauty webinar. I'm Helena Grzesk, I'm the CMO at the British Beauty Council, and today I'm joined by three wonderful guest experts here to explore the key issues facing our businesses today. With the majority of pandemic relief and support schemes withdrawn, lots of repayments of loans that have been taken out during the pandemic to survive starting to be due for repayment. There's lots of businesses who are really kind of very heightened awareness of coming out that side of COVID recovery. So I think it's safe to say that there have been many, good and viable businesses that have seen their debts increase and potentially get out of hand throughout the pandemic, certainly following the trading restrictions and the closure periods that we've had over the past 2 years. And certainly as we've just swiftly arrived at the end of a tax year, I think that's something that's quite pertinent for us to discuss today. So we're going to be looking at the issues and suggesting some practical steps that business leaders can take to put their brands in the best position moving forwards. So I will introduce my wonderful expert panel today. I've got Mireille. Mireille is Senior Associate within the corporate team at BDB Pitmans, which is a leading UK law firm. Mireille advises a range of clients, including those within the beauty industry, on various company-related matters. Also joining us today from BDB Pitmans is David, who is Legal Director in the Restructuring and Insolvency team. David advises individuals, companies, directors, banks, insolvency practitioners, such as administrators and liquidators, and he's worked with a number of businesses connected to the beauty industry, from salons to manufacturers, as well as businesses within the wider retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Throughout the pandemic, he's helped businesses to navigate the challenges through various lockdowns, including restructuring and looking at how to be more efficient going forwards. And we've got the wonderful Valerie. Valerie is an international business strategist consultant, been in the beauty industry for 30 years. Valerie's had crucial commercial experience working within brands from Clarins, Urban Retreat, L'Occitane, and her latest role was head of spa operations at Steiner, as well as running her own beauty salon. So Valerie really does recognise the various challenges that owners and managers are facing, and is really able to help focus their work in key strategies so that they can implement these things in their own businesses. So I think I'm absolutely blessed to have you all join us for this session today. It's really important, and I think often these are the subjects that we don't speak about enough, and I think the tough conversations are the ones that we often don't want to have. So it's really fantastic that you're all here to support with this today and share your expertise. So thank you all very much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here. Yes, thank you.
I think probably the best way to kind of head into this is head first, really, isn't it? And really look at what are the early signs or the red flags that a business in trouble should see or could look out for, in your opinion?
I mean, I'd like to kick this off, obviously, because I've been a consultant for 9 years now, dealing with a lot of beauty salons, hair salons, clinics, spas, and supporting the owners on a one-to-one basis. And what I see when it comes to the whole financial issues is definitely linked to the cash flow. So if we do what I call a business audit, when we come in and really understand every areas of the business, and we can see that there is room for improvement, there's room for progress, that the cash flow might be really tight, but we are able to build it over a certain amount of time, then you know that the business is going to be going the right way in some respect. But sometimes we do an audit and it's like you're going to have a real trouble kind of building that cash flow, because perhaps, like you mentioned, there's been a lot of decision making through refinances, through all sorts of things, and the lack of perhaps staff, or depending on everyone's. That's why I love one-to-one coaching, because it does depend on on the situation and what they've done previously. But the cash flow is a huge indicative to me that, you know, things can get better or things are going to get tighter and tighter. And the minute you have to start borrowing money, I remember talking to a owner was saying, oh, I just had to borrow $5,000 to pay the supplier, you know, the brand supplier, because otherwise I couldn't, and I'm not going to stay on a certain level with that supplier, and I'm not going to get as many benefits. You know, you need to kind of ask yourself, is this a running business, or are you going from one pole to another to survive? And how long on a mindset and the feeling like you're in a wheel, really, like a hamster, isn't it? Where how long can you sustain that for? And I think that's where the real questions, like you say, Helena, are really, really needing to be addressed. So I guess I'm at the beginning of that, but David, you're then dealing with a lot more from that, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and I mean, I think one of the key things to be aware of, particularly after the last couple of years, is that even the best run businesses can get into trouble through no fault of their own. Helena referred to it earlier, kind of all the mandated closures, and there's a perfect storm at the moment. We've got the mandated closures throughout the pandemic, and then restricted trading when you come back, and then we come into rising cost of living, inflation, Brexit, supply chain issues, etc. You can have a perfectly well-run business and encounter difficulties through no fault of your own, which is difficult, and it's difficult to deal with, but it doesn't mean it's the end. As Valerie said, if you're careful and plan in advance and realize things are happening, then you can hopefully get ahead of things. And taking a step back, sometimes the issue is identifying there's a problem to start with. So taking a step back and trying to notice if there's increased pressures on the business, whether that be increasing costs, whether that's stock, suppliers, even utilities, staff, drop in turnover or inquiries. All of these things feed into what Valerie was talking about where the cash flow position is. Before you get to the stage of having to seek finance, are you juggling payments before you get there? Are you seeking credit you wouldn't have sought beforehand? These are all the sort of things to look out for. And if you notice them, then that's the point to talk to someone and try and take advice. Don't bury your head in the sand.
That's super crucial. And I think a lot of the time when there is that kind of vicious circle in a way, it's exactly that, isn't it? They bury the head in the sand because it's a lot warmer and we don't really have to deal with anything necessarily. But the minute you kind of highlight and go through processes that, you know, a lot of businesses we deal with, you can go back to the path that you perhaps were once before, or even better, because you readjust and reassess your business, and the structure could be different. It actually suits you better. But it's really taking that charge of, okay, I know I can't function like this anymore. A lot of people do ask themselves that, isn't it? Especially since the pandemic. I know I can't function like I used to. And how can I do that moving forward? So there are solutions, I guess, but it's very much being aware of, okay, I'm in a situation and I need to kind of seek that help, really.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that you jump straight to a restructuring or insolvency discussion. It's just good management of the business and taking control of things and keeping an eye on how it runs.
That's a really good point. And I suppose what do you see as being the main challenges that when they get to that point, what can they implement before as an alternative to insolvency? What are the steps before that?
To me, it goes back to the structure. So when I talk about structure, is a lot of time I meet owners that are telling me, you know, they have managers, they have the title because they don't want to lose them, but these managers are not really managing anything. They've just got the title. So already we've got an issue with the structure and how much the owner is kind of holding on their shoulders, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So it goes back to I'm very operational driven, very operation and structure driven in the business, because I believe that's going to be the foundation. So to me, it goes back to that structure of the business, who's doing what, how can it give you time as an owner to actually do things. A lot of time we find owners that are going into the business, they're running around, they're being poked at every different direction, but they don't have that time to take the step back and really assess where they're at and who should be doing what. And to me, the challenge is we talk a lot about time management, for example. We talk a lot about the structure of their workload, who does what and how. And perhaps they don't need the big team. What we've seen since the pandemic is that, and with recruitment being so difficult at the moment, is that we're doing better in a lot of businesses with less people. So that says something, isn't it? We've been carrying a lot of heavy weight of what I call Flossie, your difficult staff member. You know, she's the one that no one wants to work with. She's the one that's a little bit difficult. And we've carried those for so long and they've not been productive for the business. So now it's time to be perhaps less emotional in the way we function, but a lot more practical, because ultimately you need to go through that kind of focusing on the future, on your vision, on what you want. But if you are carrying on the way you're carrying on, which is very difficult to get out of the day-to-day operation, but it is feasible if the structure of the operation is right. And if whoever's doing who has a job title is actually doing what they say they're going to do. And a lot of time I find that the owners that are working in a business as a therapist, for example, or hairdresser, and they are in the business working with clients, it can be quite challenging to do everything. And I think that's what they're realizing.
Yeah, I think that goes back to, an age-old problem for many people, isn't it? That we're often working in our businesses, not necessarily working on them. And then I think it becomes really difficult to make sure that you're balancing your time appropriately enough. And I think particularly if you're in a client-facing role within your own business as a therapist or a hairdresser, and you've not necessarily you can't have your eye everywhere in the business at all times as well. And it's really, really difficult, isn't it, to be able to do that? And as you said, Valerie, the emotional side can be really tough, can't it? Nobody wants to have to make those tough decisions, and
that goes as well. Sorry, I'm cutting it, but in this sense, it's also the same for someone who's on their own. We deal with a lot of solo entrepreneurs who are, well, I have to earn my money, so otherwise no one's earning the money for me. Okay, but what do you do on those days of no, I was going to say days off. It's not days off. A day off is a day off, and we encourage that work-life balance. But the days admin, what is it that you do that's going to be really, really efficient for the business? And that's what they need to figure out.
Yeah, no, I agree. What sorry, David.
I was just going to say, it's as we said earlier, it's about keeping on top of everything, and it is difficult, particularly for business owners, particularly the smaller ones, as Valerie referred to. If they're on their own, or if it's a small team, then you effectively have to be a jack of all trades. You're running the business day to day, client facing, but you also have to have an eye on all of the management side of things as well. You have to be salesman, salesperson, sort of deal with that, advertising, get people in, and as well as dealing with the finances. It is a lot to deal with, but organisation can help with that, and constantly monitoring the business and keeping on top of things will help. When we talk about restructuring alongside insolvency, restructuring doesn't have to mean insolvency. Restructuring is something that businesses should potentially be doing the whole time. It's constantly reviewing things, keeping on top of things, so that when you do get to a pinch point, you're as prepared as you can be, if you get to one. Hopefully, if you're managing it and restructuring every day, you don't get there.
Yeah. What would you say would be kind of like the main things, David, in your opinion, that a business owner could look at to try to survive that restructuring challenge? Because I'm sure there's lots of people now who are maybe listening to this who are potentially considering whether their business is at this pinch point that we're talking about today, who really just want to cover their eyes right now and not want to have to go there. What would you say are those main things that they are going to need to get them through that restructuring?
I think the main thing is, first and foremost, is seeking help and not suffering alone and not going, this is where it is. As we've already said, it can happen through no fault of anyone, so don't be embarrassed about talking to people. And there are a lot of people out there that can help you with things. If the business is under real stresses, then sometimes there is no magic wand, but if you take early enough advice and early enough consideration, you can deal with that. The sort of preparatory steps, as we've said, are keeping on top of things. So accurate management information, preparing, maintaining, updating business plans, cash flow forecasts and projections, all of these things. If you do need to talk to people and seek some help, whether that's talking to someone when things have got bad, or whether it's just talking to suppliers and creditors to say, we need a bit more time, we need a bit, there are some pressures here. If you are well prepared and have realistic projections or plans to back them up, to say, look, this is what we need to get through, that's going to be much better received than silence and then going, we don't know what to do, or burying your head in the sand. When it comes to projections and plans like that, it's don't be overly optimistic. It can be tempting to try and put a good spin on things. You need to build in risks, build in protections. Don't identify key suppliers, key contracts. Don't forget the costs of sales. We often refer to a traffic light system. You have to be very careful where you're deciding to prioritize certain creditors over others. That can create real potential problems for business owners and directors. But if a business is under real stress, having a traffic light system where you know who is an essential supplier that you have to keep paying, that's red, don't stop paying them. Where is amber, where you can just defer things a little bit, and where's green, where you might not want to, but actually you can put that one on the back burner or hold it off for a second. It's all about managing things to give a business the breathing space to have them either have negotiations to turn it around and restructure, or to have other discussions about how best to protect the business going forwards, whether that's restructuring or insolvency, how best to protect the individuals involved in it.
Yeah, really, really great points. And I think it's very difficult, isn't it? I've been a business owner myself. I've fortunately never had to personally go through this process, but I know I can put my hand up and say I've been guilty of burying my head in the sand when there's been a difficult situation or a difficult team member or various things. I've been in businesses where we've had to go through redundancy processes and other things like that, and they're so difficult, and it's often that you're in these situations potentially for the first time, so you're really coming at this from a place of no knowledge and understanding, and unfortunately that fear can take over and sometimes clouds our judgment and ability to make those kind of necessary decisions. Sometimes it takes a sharp surprise, doesn't it, to action.
It can be difficult to know where to start, but that's the thing. If you if you have some of these plans or thoughts in place, even if you don't, it's never too late to start with these things. Even if you go, oh God, we've got some pressures, this has just happened, or a number of things have just happened, as we discussed earlier. It's a perfect storm at the moment, but it's never too late to start. Sit down and work out what's important, what's not. What is the, as Valerie said, it's the sort of business review process, and you can do that yourself, or you can involve people to help you. If you do unfortunately end up in a situation where you are concerned about the solvency of the business, then that's what most insolvency practitioners will be considering doing. If you already have loans from the bank, banks may notice and may ask for a business review. So whether you do it formally or informally, running through these sort of figures and considerations to work out what the true position of the business is the best way of protecting it going forwards.
I think on my end, I feel like when you are in that situation, there is, they feel there's only one solution, or they can't see the solution. It's just very, very foggy. And I think having someone else that can overview the business, because we're very emotional in the industry. It's an industry that's an emotional buyer. We're emotionally, kind of purchase things, or oh, we love this brand, we're going to take this brand on board, or so it's a very emotional, less kind of practical decision, and I feel that that is definitely affecting the way perhaps the owner is functioning, the way perhaps the owner is dealing with things, and having that non-emotional, more practical advice that allows you. There's been so much information. That's what we found, our clients coming to us saying, look, I know what I need to do something, but I don't know where to start. I open my laptop and have no clue where to start. That's where procrastination happens, because it's easier to go and do the washing up than to worry about anything else, you know. So because we have had an information overload, and sometimes simplifying, and that's what we like doing, is simplifying what is going to have an impact within your business at that time, right now, as the business stands, not what it was 3 years ago, not what it is necessarily 2 years ago, what it is now. Where are you now on the kind of personal, professional point of view, and really giving some very detailed small steps, because what I'm finding is when they come to us, it's just very lost in where to proceed. That's the main thing, isn't it? I think that's joining your point, David, on the...
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, it's there can be such an overload of information, both information within the business. Where do I start? Which bits do I consider? I mean, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, make sure you have business plans, make sure you have cash flow forecasts. It's never too late to start keeping an eye on this. That's a lot of things to contend with. But even if you are on top of that, there are then a lot of options. If you realise there's stresses, it's, as Valerie says, what do you want the outcome to be going forwards? There's, you know, restructuring covers so many things, from informal negotiations with stakeholders and creditors, to more formal rescheduling of payments, to formal insolvency processes that can involve either an orderly wind down or putting the business into a process and then selling the good bits of the business. There are lots of different options, but it doesn't have to mean the end of the business. It doesn't have, and if it is the end of the business, it doesn't have to mean the end of the brand or the end of the idea. There are a lot of options. So I can see that it's very easy to get blinded by how much information you need and how many options there are. But having someone help you through the process is fairly key. And the earlier someone is involved, whether that's someone like Valerie or an insolvency practitioner, who are normally accountants, or a solicitor, the earlier they're involved, the more options are available, the more time there is to deal with things.
Would you say that the rescheduling payments and, you know, shifting into taking those kind of steps is maybe a little bit easier to do now following the pandemic, because that's kind of been something that the world has opened up to, hasn't it, really, throughout the pandemic? It's kind of had to, there's been rent moratoriums in place and lots of kind of activities happening in various sectors, hasn't it? Like, do you think that's something that even more people are more open to?
It is, yeah. A lot of creditors will be more receptive, and particularly if you approach them, as we've discussed, if you're realistic about things and if you have evidence to support your position, if you have a strategy and a plan that you can explain to them, this is why I need a bit of either time to pay or a concession or a bit of help, whatever it is, this is why, and if you help me with this, then it will turn everything around and it will be in your interests in the long term. People are more receptive. That, you know, everyone knows you can't get blood out of a stone, and everyone knows that everyone's had difficulties for the last few years, particularly in these sorts of industries. You do have to be careful with doing this. There are very strict rules, and particularly where a business is in a corporate structure, directors can end up with personal liability if they choose to prefer one creditor over another. So you do have to be careful about it, but if it's consensual and you're talking to people, as long as you don't force people to accept things, then open discussions are the best way forward. And if you need to have a lot of those discussions, then that is maybe where you should be thinking about, well, actually, if there are so many discussions that we need concessions from everyone and they need to be massive, then that's where maybe you should talk to someone, because you may need a more formal process to protect yourself going forwards.
Yeah, no, it's a really valid point. Valerie, you a couple of times have mentioned about it being, you know, quite emotional and about mindset, and how do you think people can really kind of support their self with mindset, working through that process, because it's such a challenge, isn't it? And I think we harbour that guilt, don't we, often when we're a small business and we're very close to our teams, we're very conscious that it's other people's livelihoods, and we often know people on a more personal level than you might do in larger organisations. How can people really kind of support their mindset through that?
I think it's a very difficult one. That's where I find that it's perhaps the most challenging effect, because when it comes to finances, and it's like you said, it's poking on your livelihood, on everyone else's livelihood, on the suppliers, and the way you feel yourself as an owner. And I find that perhaps is the most difficult, because we can find practical decisions. We can find, like David said, there are solutions. There are perhaps too many to consider. So therefore, seeking that help is really, really helping you to, I guess, having that hand-holding exercise. But on a mindset point of view, what I found with this particular difficult situations where we've been involved, where it's kind of limit, are we going to make it, are we not? And we come in and we think, yes, there's a glimpse of hope because we're going to work on this and this. And by the way, what we work on first would be the stock management. Here's an emotional purchase for you in the beauty industry and the hair industry, beauty in particular. Stock management is perhaps where we can really support them, because a lot of time they have 30 days, 60 days payment. Next thing you know, you've got a quiet month and you've got that big bill that you purchased when you were busy. So that's where we start really to save a lot of cash flow and a lot of mind processing around it. But what I've found is a mindset of the owner who are perhaps feeling on their own, feeling perhaps a little bit ashamed, feeling perhaps a little bit out of their depth in a way. And also it's after. There's a lot of question of what after, what am I going to do after, how am I going to, and that starts to generate a huge insecurity from the present moment to the future. And unless you really work on that mindset through all various tools. There's all various tools that can help you with the mindset. If you never try meditation, why not start doing that? Why not start going out there and doing some running? I know you're a running fan, Helena, and it's why not doing things that you've never done before to release those emotions and not carrying all of that heavy stuff on your shoulders and sharing those issues. So that's one thing, that's one element of protecting your mindset within a day-to-day basis on the present moment. But what I've found, which has been quite in a way, working with them a lot more around their vision, because what happens when the present is really blurry, the vision, we can't even see the next 5 years, let alone this year, so what I don't want is, I don't want my client to go from one fire to the next fire. It's very important to be able to handle the step of what after, whether you keep the business, you're downsizing, you're changing the whole structure, whatever, but you're keeping, like David said, the brand ethos or anything like that, the idea, you've got to be ready, or you're going to something completely different, or you've got to be ready for that next step. And that's perhaps the most challenging element of the mindset, because we're so in it and we're so deep in it that we can't see the future. So to me, it's very, very important to work on what we can do now, but what next? And if you don't have the idea now, I've just been with a client who, I can't see the next 5 years, I can't see this year. Well, let's take step by step. Let's not go too fast. Let's take step by step. But if I don't protect the way she's functioning, she's going to go from, creating that habit and that pattern of the way she's functioning into something, and it'll be the same conversation 3 years down the line, because she's not dealt with the mindset now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And I think that what's next piece is really, really important, isn't it? Because that's a lot where it's the fear of the unknown, isn't it? And actually being able to acknowledge that, okay, is my business in a place where I need to have a look at this and do something about it? Am I going to acknowledge that? How am I going to move forward with that? And I think one of the big things that people worry about is damage to their brand and reputation as they move beyond this scenario, however they choose to do whatever is the right thing for their business. So David, you actually mentioned briefly a little while ago about kind of the options that people have got moving through. What would you say are the key things that people can focus on to try to protect their brand and reputation as they kind of steer through this path?
Sure. First and foremost is usually communications, both externally and internally. You obviously want to be very cautious and careful about what you say. You don't want to scare people, whether that be staff or suppliers, or the bank, or even you don't want to tip off competitors necessarily. But if there are difficulties and if things are going to be happening, you need to keep people informed. So talk to stakeholders in the business, whether that's lenders, landlords, business partners, customers, staff. Let them know that's the best way to protect a brand and protect a reputation. You, as I say, you may need to be cautious about when you do that, but particularly if the company is really stressed and if there may need to be some sort of formal insolvency process in due course, if you're going to reposition and come out of it and bounce back, however that happens, communicating when that happens is much better than people gossiping or finding out about it too late. So that's a key first point, is just communicating with everyone involved. As regards other options, I think it depends what is going to happen. I mean, you have the informal discussions. It depends what the pressures are. If it's a need to reduce headcount, then you're obviously going to want to talk to some employment consultants to make sure you do it properly and don't create extra liabilities and deal with it appropriately. If it is just a financial position, Valerie referred to earlier, that you may not want to, but it may be possible to refinance, to just either consolidate debts or swap to a better project. It may not be, but there are discussions like that. If there is going to be an insolvency process, if it does look like actually the liabilities are just too great and the business in its current format is not sustainable, then that doesn't mean it has to be the end for. It might mean it's the end for the corporate structure or the way that it has been trading. It doesn't necessarily have to mean it's the end for the brand or the business. If a business ends up in administration or liquidation, something like that, the insolvency practitioners who are appointed, the administrators or the liquidators, they will look to sell the assets of the business, whether that's selling the business as a going concern, whether that's selling assets, from stock up to selling the brand as well. That can happen, and it's therefore important to understand the distinction and the separation between the business and the brand, about what the corporate structure and the wider business that can survive the failure of the company, so to speak. And there are various options in that respect. It may be that a business owner can buy certain assets back and then start afresh. Again, there's lots of rules about that, so you have to be very careful, and that feeds back into communications. Obviously, suppliers are always, and landlords, suppliers are always very unhappy when they hear about these Phoenix businesses where they seem to have just gone into insolvency. Yeah, same people doing the same things, having left all their debts behind. But we have an entrepreneurial. The government is supportive of the entrepreneurial culture in this country, and that's why these things can happen. But if you're going to do that, whether you continue the brand through or start a new brand with similar products, however it happens, if you communicate well to everyone involved, then that is going to make that process easier and better received. So those are some of the things you can focus on to protect it.
And you know what, that's a really optimistic view on things as well, isn't it? Because I feel like often if you're, maybe facing these kind of difficulties, you almost probably think that you're at the end of the road and that your options are actually quite limited and restricted in terms of how you can manage the situation and what's next part of that journey might look like. So I think the fact that there are all these other kind of options and alternatives, how you can navigate your way through that, is really positive. And I think you mentioned about obviously like having the right kind of support, and if it's an employment specialist you need, or whatever that might look like. So I think with your corporate hat on, Mireille, why do you think it's important to kind of like find this very specialist support and advice to guide people through this process?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 key reasons to my mind. I think firstly, to have a specialist, they can provide an objective opinion on what's happening. You're living and breathing it. You perhaps can't see the situation more holistically. And to have that third party provide you with their opinion will be invaluable. And that kind of segues straight onto my next point, which is their expertise. You're not experienced, you don't know how to deal with this. You probably think you know the best way to do it because you understand your customers, you understand your business best. But for the likes of Valerie or other insolvency practitioners, they have the expertise to actually guide you through the process and advise you as to what you should do. And then thirdly, probably the most important point for business owners is cost. So the longer that you leave it, the more trouble there's going to be, the longer that the person assisting you is going to have to unpick all of these issues at much greater expense. So I think it's for those 3 reasons that it's essential to get a qualified, experienced person to kind of assist you right from when you start to think or you believe that your business is in trouble.
Yeah, so the message is quite clear, isn't it, really? Act early, get the right help and support, make the right decisions, and just, arm yourself with a toolkit of people around you who can help you make the right decisions.
Absolutely.
Which absolutely superb advice, isn't it? So how can a salon or business owner go about finding the right insolvency practitioner? So we've gone through all this process. Insolvency is where we're going. How do they find that? How do they find their expert?
Shall I take that one? That's,
Yes, please.
It's what I often do. So initially, it's talk to people you're already talking to. So if you've already been talking to someone like Valerie, then she'll have people that she's worked with before, as would Mireille and I. So, so anyone on this call, frankly, could help point you in the right direction. But also your existing advisors, so existing accountants. Whilst your normal business accountant might not, you would hope, be experienced in insolvency, they will know people who are. Your existing solicitor will be able to refer you to places. Business consultants, doctors, turnaround specialists, anyone like that will be able to point you in the right direction. There's websites. There's the R3 website, which is the insolvency trade body. It's for the Association of Business Recovery Professionals. R3 stands for Rescue, Recovery and Renewal, and all insolvency practitioners are a member of R3. The TMA website as well, the Turnaround Management Association website, they will be able to point you in the right direction. On the other side, there's the Insolvency Service website. On the very front page of the government's Insolvency Service website is Find an Insolvency Practitioner. So there are lots of ways to be pointed towards things. As I said, obviously talking to someone you already know, if they can make personal recommendations, that will be useful. Not just because however you go about it, the best way is to find someone who has experience of your particular, not your particular business, but the sector you operate in, the industry you operate in. It is helpful to have someone that understands the pressures. Most insolvency practitioners will have experience in running businesses one way or another, even if it's just running it to wind it down orderly. And so you want someone that has an experience of that sector.
And that's great advice, isn't it? Because it really does help, doesn't it? That knowledge is power.
It does. And just because you enter, particularly administration, that doesn't mean it's going to lead to liquidation and the closure of the business. You can have a trading administration where the insolvency practitioners take control of the business and they trade it and they look to turn it around. That's particularly where it's key to have someone that understands the industry.
Yeah,
I'd like to add to that, which is, to me, this is all the noise and information that's out there sometimes is where we're finding the clients being really difficult into how and where to go through. So all of these links and everything else I think is great, but having that support as well next to you of that one voice. I think a lot of time we see it in social media groups, or we see it in, and what about this? And then we listen to too many things. Just really keep it streamlined into what you're going through, and having someone that works in the industry or that knows the industry, having people like yourself, David and Mireille, to really help them through those processes, I think for me is very important. And it doesn't mean that perhaps you are a business that's quite healthy and actually have managed to cash flow really well since the pandemic and managed to downsize, etc. It doesn't mean you can't have that kind of outlook of someone else as well, looking at two options as well of where you could go. Because the earlier you look after your finances, the better in the long term. Is making it very bulletproof. As far as I'm concerned, bulletproof, I'm not sure, future-proof, that's what I wanted to say. In terms of your, of where you're going, I think it's having conversation and looking at your cash flow in a healthy way very, very early on, even if you've got a strong business, I think to me is quite crucial.
Yeah, and you can open up other avenues that weren't necessarily there. So you may be thinking, this is a stress, or you may have just finished the financial year and your accountant's gone, things aren't looking good. You might want to, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean the I word, the insolvency word. There are other options with restructuring, and restructuring is not insolvency. That you may be able to exploit alternative routes to market. There may, whether it's savings in certain areas or just different things to focus on. If you undertake that business review, you will understand where to focus, what's worth saving, what isn't, and then you can move on to how to do it.
I agree.
And I think, Valerie, what you said about people giving each other advice within Facebook groups and things, I am part of lots of those from being in the industry for so many years. And I often see people asking for business advice and support on various things. And quite frankly, some of the answers are quite scary. So I have to agree and say, well, everything that's been said on this call, really, I think getting the right advice and speaking to the experts on this is so important, isn't it?
Yeah. And stop having that kind of, I think there's two ways the owners are going to be. They're either going to bury their head in the sand or shout about it and then want kind of that support. But where is the support coming from? Every business, as far as I'm concerned, that's why we do one-to-one coaching, because every business, as far as I'm concerned, is different. Even though it's the same industry, it's different aspiration, different cash flow, different structure in itself. So it's about systems and procedures, but it's also about really kind of getting those voices that you believe and you relate to, but stop making too many decisions based on things that are not necessarily funded, really.
Yeah. And I think there's a risk that people are going to expose themselves to like aspects of personal liability, maybe, if they're not getting the right advice, isn't it? Yeah. So Mireille, what practical steps would you say that a business owner can take to kind of put their brand in that best position moving forward to minimize or remove kind of like that risk of personal liability at the end?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I'll start off by actually responding to the question and then kind of broadly speaking about it. So everything that's been touched on, I mean, from a corporate perspective, is documenting absolutely everything. So if you're a company, you should be making records of all decisions that the directors have made for 10 years. Financials, obviously the most important is to keep thorough records, projections, you name it. So it's easy to see from 1 week to the next, actually, there's been a slight deterioration here, plus 1 week on, quite a significant deterioration. So it's really record keeping and speaking to advisors and not ignoring the problem. But also in terms of protecting your brand, it's also to be aware of how that personal issue, or rather how that personal liability can arise. So in the context of private limited companies, there's this misconception that if you protect your business, if you set it up, you establish it as a private limited company, you're protected by this wrapper of immunity, and you're not, especially as a director. So, for example, in the event of wrongful trading or insolvent wrongful trading or fraudulent trading, which in non-lawyer speak is burying your head in the sand and hoping it goes away, you could become liable for the losses of the company, and that's something that the court would assess. So in lawyers speak, fraudulent and wrongful trading are ways in which personal liability could arise. It's when a director knows that a company is having difficulties but chooses to ignore it. And another way that liability could arise is personal guarantees. So more often than not, third parties will say, we want a personal guarantee for the company's obligations. And a really good example here is a lease. A landlord will want a personal guarantee from a director of the company. Now, if that's for a 10-year period and the lease is the company hits rocky times in year 5, goes through an insolvency process, you've got 5 years left. And that director who's the guarantor is going to have to foot that 5 years. So that's where personal guarantee can arise as well. And another type of personal liability that could arise, not directly related, is in the event that a court has found a director to have not acted in a proper way, have not regarded properly the interests of the creditors, a director can be struck off. They can be prohibited from being a director of a company from between up to 2 to 15 years. And that could be catastrophic, because a lot of people listening to this webinar, whether you're a director or not, whether you have one business or several directors, if you're prohibited from being a director for several years across multiple businesses, and they may be different, that's your income. That could be really damaging. And that's something to be aware of. And what I'm not trying to say is that being a director is quite dangerous. It's not. Directors manage the business. You're the forefront of the business. Directors are important. By thinking, perhaps if I resign as a director now, or I don't become a director, I won't ever have personal liability. That won't be the case. If you're advising the board or the managers, you could become a shadow director, which means that you owe the same obligations and you could be subject to the same personal liabilities as actual directors. And finally, there was another point I had. If you were to resign as a director immediately before or when the company's having difficulties, a court would look on that very dimly. It's like a way to try and get away with what a court would have found you responsible for. So what I'm trying to say is it'd be viewed very dimly if you decide to resign as a director just before an insolvency type situation arose. That's not the solution.
No,
you can be found liable as a director when a director, or for liabilities of the company prior to the period. So resigning, what I'm saying is resigning isn't an option.
It's Mireille's quite right. Insolvency practitioners, once they're appointed, whether it's administration or liquidation, they have a duty to investigate the affairs of the directors as well. So even administration, if you're thinking, right, we'll use administration to, which is, and we haven't really discussed the differences between the different process between a voluntary arrangement, a company voluntary arrangement, CVA, that lots of retail businesses have used over recent years, or administration or liquidation. But particularly in administration and liquidation, the insolvency practitioners do have a duty to investigate the affairs of the directors and report effectively to the government, to specific government department in that respect. So you need to be aware of that going in, but equally, that's why if that's a process you're going through, then talking to insolvency practitioners in advance, you'll be able to talk through any issues. And one of the things to have in the forefront of, the directors should have in the forefront of their minds, is that when a business becomes distressed, if you've hit that point where you think the business is insolvent or may be unable to avoid entering an insolvency process, then the director's responsibilities change. Normally, a director's responsibility is to promote the success of the company. But if insolvency is likely or has happened, then the primary duty actually becomes acting in the interests of creditors. And that's why insolvency practitioners will investigate. And that's why, as Mireille says, that you just have to be careful when you're in effectively that twilight zone, that you act appropriately and you don't go, it's okay, I can resign, or it's okay, it's a company, they can't come after me personally. There are avenues for that to happen, and that's entirely to protect creditors and make sure that directors don't misbehave and don't take the wrong actions. But that's why taking advice and working through it properly can avoid that liability. So, and if you've taken advice through that process, then you should hopefully have reduced the possibility of all the scary possibilities that we've just been discussing.
Absolutely superb advice. This has been so interesting. Thank you all so much. I think the key things here really are spot the signs early, don't bury your head in the sand, react, have a look, see how you can restructure, seek out the right support, advice from the experts, wherever you need to slot them into your business, and just make sure you're doing everything the right way. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
It sounds so easy when you say it like that.
I mean, I do like to simplify things, David. Yeah, I mean
the bottom line to me is that there are solutions, and whatever solutions you decide, it will be the right solution. But if you make that decision with experts that are supporting you and hand-holding you along the way, you'll find that you're not on your own, and that protects the mindset. Is feeling that you have got that support mechanism around you. To me, that's really, really important. It's why we do what we do on a one-to-one basis, because it's that hand-holding, that support, that we're here for you, because that's protecting the mindset. But if you're leaving it till the end, until having, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, and then fingers crossed it's going to be okay, in the future it could come back for sure. So you've got to protect that.
It's increasing the risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you all. I will not question you any further. I think we've covered the topic really well. I think your insights and expertise has been absolutely fantastic, and I hope it really helps and supports the people who maybe feel like they're in a position like this with their business at the moment, and helps to signpost them into making the right next steps and the right decisions, and seeking out the people who can truly help support them through the next steps, because we've said it doesn't mean it's the end of the road. There are options, which is wonderful. How can you end an insolvency webinar in a positive light? There we go. There are options. There we go. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll look forward to seeing you all again very soon.